Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I had always trusted him, my husband, my best friend. We'd been married for 5 years, and everything seemed perfect. Or so I thought. He had this gym routine, you see. Every day, after work, he would leave for hours. He'd always say how great it was to blow off steam, how it was his me time to stay healthy. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was just doing something good for himself, right? But the more I thought about it, the more his commitment seemed a little too perfect. There was never a change in his schedule. He would come back sweaty, with that satisfied look on his face. I tried to be understanding. Maybe he needed that escape from the stresses of daily life. But I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't normal to be so perfectly consistent, to never skip a day. Why was I feeling so uneasy? One night, I decided to follow him. I didn't tell him, of course. I had to see for myself. What if this gym routine was more than just that? What if I was being naive? The thought gnawed at me, and my heart began to race with every passing moment. I couldn't help it anymore. It was time for answers. I knew something was off, but I kept dismissing it. He was always too busy for me, for us. Whenever I tried to make plans, he'd say he had an important meeting or needed to go to the gym. But it wasn't just the gym that bothered me. It was how disconnected he'd become. He used to be the man who would come home and talk about his day, who would laugh and share silly stories. But now, he was distant, lost in his own world, with his gym being the most important thing in it. I'd ask, "Do you have time for us tonight?" And he'd respond with the same excuse, "I need to work out." You know how it is. It didn't take long for me to realize this wasn't just about fitness anymore. There was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But the more he pulled away, the more the truth started to surface. I just had to figure out what it was. It happened one evening. He'd left for the gym as usual, but this time something was different. He didn't text me when he arrived, like he usually did. I brushed it off at first. He was probably busy. But as the hours went on, I began to feel a strange unease settle in. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. And then, just as I was about to give up, something caught my eye, a message on his phone screen. He had forgotten to lock it. I had always trusted him with his privacy, but now, it felt like something was shifting inside me. His phone buzzed again, and my heart raced. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Can't wait to see you again tonight," it read. I froze. What was this? Who was he seeing that I didn't know about? I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut. I had always trusted my instincts, and now they were screaming at me. There was something more going on, something I wasn't seeing. I couldn't let it slide anymore. I couldn't just sit back and pretend everything was fine. So I decided to follow him. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to see it with my own eyes. My mind was racing with questions. Was he really going to the gym? Or was he meeting someone else? I couldn't wait any longer. It was time to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The plan was simple. I would wait for him to leave for the gym as usual, then I would follow him. It wasn't easy to accept that I had to sneak around like this, but the doubt had grown too large to ignore. My thoughts swirled as I prepared myself mentally. What if I was wrong? What if I was overreacting? But then again, what if I wasn't? What if the worst was true? I checked the time. He was getting ready to leave, as usual. His gym bag slung over his shoulder, the same routine. I took a deep breath, grabbed my coat, and quietly slipped out the door behind him. I was determined to know the truth. I followed him at a distance, careful not to make my presence known. It felt wrong, but it also felt necessary. My heart was pounding in my chest as I watched him drive toward the gym. I had to keep telling myself this was just curiosity, just making sure everything was as it seemed. But deep down, I knew I was afraid of what I might find. As he parked outside the gym, I parked a few blocks away. I waited in my car, watching him walk towards the entrance with a confident stride. But then, he stopped. He turned, looking over his shoulder. My breath caught. Was he looking for someone? Was he aware of me? But no, he continued inside, and I let out a shaky breath. For a moment, I questioned everything. Was I overthinking it? I waited outside the gym for what felt like hours. It was cold, and the night was eerily quiet, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Something told me to stay. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw him through the large windows. He wasn't alone. There was a woman beside him. She was laughing, touching his arm in a way that made my stomach churn. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was intimate. My heart raced, and I couldn't breathe. This wasn't a gym session. This was something else. I watched as he leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and they both walked into the back room together. My world shattered in that instant. The gym had never been the truth. It was just a cover for something far darker. I stayed in my car, frozen. My mind couldn't process what I had just seen. How could he do this to me? I had been nothing but supportive of his gym routine. I had even told him how proud I was of him for staying in shape. And now I was learning that it was all a lie. It felt like a sick joke, but there was no punchline. I had seen them with my own eyes, and it was undeniable. My husband, my faithful husband, was meeting this woman at the gym, but it wasn't about exercise. It was about something far more painful. I had to know more, but I couldn't just walk in there and confront him. I had to think this through. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about everything I had ever believed in being shattered. The woman, her face, it was all too familiar. I didn't recognize her immediately, but as I replayed the scene in my mind, I realized I had seen her before. A few months ago, at a friend's party. She was one of the guests, and she had introduced herself as just a friend. She seemed harmless, just someone in his extended circle. But I didn't know that back then. I didn't know the depth of the lies. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just a friend. She was the woman who had slowly been taking him away from me. Every smile, every moment she had shared with him, it was all a lie. She was the other woman. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The way he'd smiled at her, the way they spoke to each other. It wasn't just a fling. It was something deeper. The thought of my husband, the man I trusted, betraying me like this was unbearable. And what was worse, he had no idea I knew. I had the power now, the truth that he couldn't deny. But I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I needed more answers. I needed to understand how long this had been going on, what he'd been hiding from me all this time. I couldn't let him off the hook with just a simple confession. He needed to feel the weight of what he'd done. He needed to know I saw everything. I always thought trust was the foundation of a relationship. I never questioned it with him. I believed in our vows, in the promises we made to each other. But now, as I sat there in my car, the reality was sinking in. What was once a pillar of strength between us was now nothing more than a crumbling illusion. How could I have been so blind? How could I have not seen it? Every word he said, every "I love you," now felt like a lie. Every time he kissed me goodbye before heading to the gym, it wasn't about working out. It was about escaping into a world where I didn't exist, where he could be someone else, someone free of the responsibilities of our marriage. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed more proof. I needed to understand how deep this went. Days passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The betrayal felt like a weight on my chest, suffocating me. I started noticing other signs, his distant glances, the way he avoided making eye contact when we spoke. He didn't seem like the man I married. He seemed like a stranger who was hiding a secret life from me. I started to retrace our steps, our conversations. Was there ever a moment when things started to change? When did he start seeing her? When did I become the last thing on his mind? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was. His actions weren't just a slip-up. They were deliberate. They were calculated. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on to the facade of our marriage. Everything felt like a lie now. That night, he came home later than usual. I had spent the entire evening in a haze of anger and heartbreak, trying to keep it together. But when he walked through the door, I could see it in his eyes. He was guilty. There was a darkness behind them, something he couldn't hide. He tried to act casual, asking about my day like everything was normal, but I wasn't fooled. I had to resist the urge to confront him right then. It would have been too easy to scream, to accuse him of what I had seen, but I needed to be calm. I needed to stay in control. As he walked past me, I caught a glimpse of something in his bag. A small, folded piece of paper. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't need to see it. I knew what it was. For weeks, I had watched him come and go, trying to put the pieces together. Each day he came home with the same story. The gym was great tonight. I worked hard. The excuses were always the same, as if he thought I wouldn't notice. But I was paying attention. The way he avoided my eyes, the way his stories didn't line up, told me everything I needed to know. The first time I asked him about her, he laughed it off. "You're crazy," he said. "She's just a friend from the gym." But something in his tone, something in his voice, told me that wasn't true. The defensive way he spoke, the way his eyes shifted nervously, it wasn't normal. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I couldn't. Not after everything I had seen. It was a Tuesday evening when everything changed. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone when his phone buzzed beside me. It was a message from her. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight," it said. The words burned into my mind. I felt my blood run cold. I had seen enough. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't know if he was still in the kitchen or if he had heard the notification, but in that moment, I decided this would be the turning point. I wasn't going to keep pretending everything was fine. I wasn't going to wait for the day he finally admitted it. He had already admitted it to himself, and now I had the proof. I took a deep breath, picked up his phone, and stared at the screen. I was no longer going to be the one left in the dark. I was going to find the truth. The moment he walked into the living room, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He froze, his eyes darting around the room as if he were searching for a way out. But there was no escape now. The evidence was right in front of him. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice firm now. "I saw the texts. I saw everything." His face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks, and for the first time in weeks, I saw him look truly guilty. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was caught. There was no excuse, no way to justify the lies anymore. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or devastated. The truth was out, but the weight of it was crushing me. He sat down next to me, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was stupid and I made a mistake." But his words felt hollow. How could an apology fix what he had done? How could I forgive him for betraying me in the worst possible way? He begged for my forgiveness, told me that it was just a momentary lapse in judgment, but I knew better. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a slip-up. This was something he had been hiding for months, and the depth of his betrayal was too much to ignore. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want his apologies. I wanted the truth, and I wanted it now. But I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. Not when the hurt was still so fresh. I needed time. I thought about her constantly, who she was, how long this had been going on. Was she always there, waiting for him? Did she know about me? Did she know he was married? I couldn't stop thinking about it. She wasn't just some random woman from the gym. She was the one who had wormed her way into his life, into his heart. And that made me angry. How could she do this? How could she knowingly destroy a marriage, knowing he was committed to someone else? I wanted to confront her, to ask her why. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. She wasn't the one who had broken my trust. He was. He kept saying he was sorry, that he regretted everything, but none of it felt real. His apologies were just words, and words couldn't undo the damage he had caused. I had been the one to sacrifice for him, to support him through everything. And yet, in return, I got lies, betrayal, and heartbreak. Every time he told me he was sorry, I felt a little less inclined to believe him. How many times had he said those words to me before, in moments of conflict? They no longer held any weight. His sincerity was lost in the sea of his actions. I had to face the fact that everything was different now. The trust was gone. The love felt like a distant memory. I didn't know if I could stay in a marriage built on lies. My heart longed for the man I thought I knew, but the man before me wasn't him. He was a stranger, a man who had hurt me more than I could have ever imagined. I realized something. I needed to move forward, not with him, but for myself. The road ahead wasn't clear, and it was terrifying, but I couldn't keep living in this lie. I had to rebuild. I had to rediscover who I was, outside of this marriage, outside of the betrayal. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep the betrayal went. It wasn't just about him meeting someone else. It was about the foundation of our entire relationship being built on a lie. I had given him my trust, my love, and my loyalty, and he had thrown it all away for what? A fling? A temporary escape? I couldn't fathom how someone could destroy everything we built so carelessly. As I sat alone in our bedroom, the weight of it all began to overwhelm me. I thought about the first time we met, the laughter we shared, the dreams we had for our future. All of it now felt like a distant memory, tainted by his actions. I felt lost, like I didn't even know who I was anymore. Everything had changed, and I wasn't sure how to pick up the pieces. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. I didn't know what to do or where to go. I couldn't stay in the same house with him, not after everything that had happened. But I didn't want to leave either. I still loved him, or at least, I loved the man I thought he was. The man he used to be. But love wasn't enough anymore. Trust had been shattered beyond repair. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out who I was without him. I packed a bag and moved into my sister's house for a while. It was a decision I never thought I'd have to make, but it felt like the only way to start the healing process. The silence between us was deafening. He texted, called, begged me to come back, but I couldn't. Every time I heard his voice, all I could think about was the lies, the woman, the betrayal. It was suffocating. I needed time to think, to figure out if I could ever forgive him, if I could ever trust him again. There were moments when I wanted to reach out, to tell him how much I was hurting, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. He had already made his choices. Now, I had to make mine. As I sat alone in my sister's living room, I realized that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep waiting for him to change. I had to focus on my own healing. But it was harder than I thought. Every day felt like a battle between holding on to what I had lost and letting go of the man I once loved. I started seeing a therapist. At first, I was reluctant. I didn't think talking to someone could help, but the more I opened up, the more I realized how much I needed it. Talking about what had happened, about the pain I felt, was the first step toward healing. It didn't take away the hurt, but it helped me process it. The therapist helped me see that I wasn't weak for feeling betrayed. I wasn't weak for wanting answers, for wanting to understand why he did it. I had spent so much time blaming myself for the breakdown of our relationship, but it wasn't my fault. It was his. The hardest part of all of this was the decision I had to make. Did I stay and try to rebuild what we had? Or did I walk away and move on with my life? I thought about the future we had planned. The house, the vacations, the family we dreamed of building together. But now, all of that seemed impossible. How could I trust him again? How could I ever look at him the same way after what he had done? I realized that no matter how much I loved him, I couldn't keep living in a relationship built on lies. It was painful to admit, but I knew it was the right decision. I had to let him go and start a new chapter in my life. One where I was in control, one where I could heal and find happiness on my own. He showed up at my sister's house one evening. He was standing at the door, looking desperate, broken. "Please," he begged. "Please don't leave me. I'll do anything. I'll fix this." I couldn't look at him. I couldn't bear to hear his voice. But I knew I had to face him, to tell him the truth. "You broke me," I said, my voice shaking. "You broke my trust, and I can't go back to that. I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when it isn't." His eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never meant to hurt you. I was just lost. I didn't know what I was doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing," I replied coldly. "And you chose to hurt me anyway." The truth was painful, but it was freeing too. Saying those words, letting him know how much he had destroyed, was the first step toward finally letting go. For weeks, he continued to call and text. His messages were filled with apologies, promises to change, and pleas for me to come back. He told me how much he regretted everything, how he had learned his lesson, but I couldn't believe him anymore. His words were empty, just like his actions had been. How could I trust someone who had broken my heart so completely? I deleted his messages, blocked his number, and focused on moving forward. I couldn't let him keep pulling me back into the past. I had to protect myself, no matter how hard it was. As the weeks went on, I started to find pieces of myself again. I rediscovered things I loved, things I had forgotten in the midst of my marriage. I started taking painting classes, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I began to travel, to experience life without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. I began to laugh again, to feel joy in the small moments. It wasn't easy. Some days, the pain still lingered. But little by little, I was healing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. I woke up one morning with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. I was stronger than I had been before, and I realized that the woman who had been hurt so deeply was no longer the same. She had grown, she had learned, and she had moved on. I didn't need him to feel complete. I didn't need him to be happy. I had everything I needed within myself, and that was the greatest gift I could give myself: freedom. Freedom from the lies, from the betrayal, from the pain. It was time to start fresh. It was time to live for me. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be days when the memories would resurface, when the hurt would come back. But I was no longer afraid of it. I had faced my fears, confronted the pain, and walked away from the man who had betrayed me. And in doing so, I had found a new strength, a strength I never knew I had. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. It's amazing how freeing it is to let go of something that's been holding you back. For months, I had carried the weight of my husband's betrayal, letting it define my every thought. But once I began to truly let go, to stop allowing his actions to control my emotions, something shifted. I felt lighter, freer, like I had shed a part of myself I no longer needed. I was no longer the woman who waited for him to come home and question his every move. I was the woman who was rediscovering herself. I went back to the things that made me feel alive: long walks, spontaneous adventures with friends, nights spent laughing until my stomach hurt. The world was opening up in ways I hadn't imagined. And for the first time in a long time, I was at peace. It was a normal Saturday afternoon when I ran into him. I hadn't expected to see him again, not like this. But there he was, standing in front of the coffee shop I had just entered, his eyes locking with mine. There was no avoiding him now. His face was filled with regret, and I could tell he was trying to figure out what to say. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Do I smile and pretend nothing happened? Do I avoid him altogether? He stepped forward, his voice shaky. "I've been trying to reach you. I just wanted to see how you were. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know how sorry I am." His words were almost heartbreaking, and for a moment, I felt that familiar pang of sorrow. But I had already made peace with everything. The woman I was now didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need his validation. "I'm doing fine," I said quietly, my voice calm but firm. "I've moved on." His expression faltered, and for the first time, I saw the real weight of his regret. It wasn't about him getting me back. It was about the realization that he had lost me, forever. For the first time in years, I had nothing tying me down. No false hopes, no constant questions. I could breathe. I could live. I wasn't defined by the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had overcome it. I moved into my own apartment. It was small but cozy, my space, my sanctuary. I filled it with memories of my own making, things that reflected who I was now. Slowly, I began to build the life I had put on hold for so long. I reconnected with old friends, traveled to places I had always wanted to see, and even started taking up new hobbies. There was joy in every little thing I did, and I learned to appreciate the beauty of my own company. Looking back, I realized something I hadn't seen before. I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I thought I would crumble under the weight of his betrayal, but I didn't. I stood tall, even when the world seemed to crumble around me. I learned that my worth wasn't defined by the love I gave or the loyalty I offered. My worth came from within, from the strength I found in the midst of pain. I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong. I stopped blaming myself for his choices. The truth was clear now. I had done nothing wrong. It was him, and I had learned to let go of it. One evening, While sipping tea and watching the sunset from my new apartment, I had an unexpected realization. I didn't need closure from him. I didn't need him to tell me why he did it or beg for forgiveness, because I had already given myself the closure I needed. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that closure wasn't something he could give me. It was something I had to give myself, and I had. The moment I decided to take control of my own happiness, to stop waiting for answers that may never come, I had found the peace I had been searching for. One quiet morning, I woke up and realized I had truly let go. I no longer thought about him every minute of the day, wondering where he was or who he was with. He was no longer a part of my life, and I had finally accepted that. It was liberating. I stood in front of my mirror, looking at the woman I had become, the woman who had survived betrayal, who had picked up the pieces of her broken heart, and who was stronger for it. I smiled at myself. I liked who I was now. I was no longer waiting for someone to change my life. I was living it on my own terms. Letting go of the past wasn't easy, but once I did, the weight I had carried for so long was finally lifted. I realized that holding on to the hurt, to the memories of betrayal, was only keeping me in chains. The freedom came when I stopped clinging to the things I couldn't change. I still had scars from the past, but they no longer defined me. They were part of my journey, but they didn't hold power over me anymore. And in that freedom, I found myself. I found peace. A few months later, I received an unexpected call. It was from him. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was because I had nothing left to lose. Hey. His voice was soft and uncertain. I just wanted to check in. I know it's been a while, but I wanted to see how you were doing. I felt a mixture of emotions. Anger, sadness, and a strange sense of indifference. I didn't need him to check in on me. I didn't need him to apologize again. I had moved past all of that. I'm fine, I replied, my voice steady. I've moved on and I'm happy. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear the disappointment in his breath. But I wasn't going to let his regret pull me back. I had moved on, and that was all that mattered. As the months went by, I continued to build my new life. I wasn't looking for love or validation from anyone. I was content with who I was, with the woman I had become. I started a new job I was passionate about, made new friends who supported and encouraged me, and focused on the things that made me happy. The future was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was mine to shape, mine to create. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what came next. I had let go of the past, and I was ready for the future. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I realized something. I was free, truly free. Free from the hurt, free from the lies, and free from the man who had once been my whole world. It was the kind of freedom I had longed for, but never thought I could achieve. I had reclaimed my life, and as I breathed in the cool evening air, I knew that this was just the beginning. The best was yet to come. In the weeks that followed, something subtle began to shift inside me. I began to notice it during quiet moments, when I would catch my reflection in a store window, or when I walked into a room with strangers. There was a quiet confidence that wasn't there before. It wasn't boastful or loud, but it was unmistakable. I walked differently. I held my head higher. I didn't feel the need to hide anymore. I had been broken, but I was no longer defined by that break. I was whole again, but stronger, more resilient. I had discovered that strength doesn't always come from fighting. Sometimes it comes from surviving. And I had survived. Despite the new sense of confidence I had found, there was still something lurking deep inside me, fear. Fear of love. I was terrified of letting anyone in again, of opening myself up to someone only for them to betray me like he had. The thought of trusting someone with my heart again felt impossible. I'd built walls around myself, higher than before, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to take them down. The idea of getting close to someone again felt like a risk I wasn't sure I was ready to take. But I knew, deep down, that fear couldn't be the thing that controlled me forever. I couldn't keep hiding from the possibility of happiness. One evening, I received an invitation. It was an event for a new art exhibit opening in the city, and as I looked at the name on the envelope, I realized it was from someone I had met recently, a colleague who had become a friend. The invitation was casual, but it was an invitation nonetheless. I wasn't sure if I was ready for something like this. I hadn't been on a date in months, and the thought of socializing outside my bubble felt overwhelming. But I also knew I had to push myself to step outside my comfort zone. I couldn't hide from the world forever. With a deep breath, I decided to go. For myself. At the art exhibit, surrounded by colorful paintings and abstract sculptures, I suddenly realized something. I was ready. I was ready to take the next step into the world of possibilities. I was no longer living in the shadow of my past. I was moving forward. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it happened, but somewhere between admiring a piece of art and laughing with friends, I felt a shift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I was allowing myself to feel joy, to embrace new experiences. And, most importantly, I was no longer afraid of opening my heart to someone new. I still didn't know what the future would hold, but I was ready to find out. That evening, while I was getting ready to leave the exhibit, my friend, who had invited me, pulled me aside. "You look different," he said, his smile warm. "You seem like you're in a much better place." I didn't expect the question he asked next. "Is there someone in your life again?" It startled me. I wasn't prepared for that conversation. But for the first time, I didn't feel uncomfortable answering. "No," I said, my voice steady. "But I think I'm finally starting to think that maybe there could be." He smiled, nodding. "Good. You deserve that. You deserve happiness, without the weight of the past holding you back." His words were simple, but they struck a chord deep inside me. I didn't need someone else to be happy, but it was nice to know that the possibility of happiness with someone else was real. Just as I was beginning to feel secure in my new life, my past resurfaced once again. It wasn't him, not directly, but his presence lingered like a ghost. I received a message from a mutual friend, one who had stayed in touch with both of us after the divorce. "He's asking about you," my friend wrote. "He wants to know if you're okay." I felt a wave of annoyance rush through me. Why now? Why after everything? I thought I was done with him, done with that part of my life. But as the days passed, I realized it didn't matter. I didn't have to answer. I didn't need his permission to move forward. I had already made that decision. And yet, there was a moment of guilt. A moment where I questioned if I should tell him that I was fine, that I was happy. But I quickly reminded myself that the only approval I needed was my own. As time passed, I found myself slowly opening up again to the possibility of love, but this time without the heavy expectations I once held. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I wasn't looking for validation. I was just looking for someone to share life with, without the pressure of perfection. And when I met someone who truly sparked my interest, I was cautious, but also open. I didn't rush into things. I let it unfold naturally, step by step. And for the first time since my marriage ended, I realized that love didn't have to be about clinging to someone out of fear or loneliness. It could be about connection, mutual respect, and joy. The decision to trust someone again was not easy. But little by little, I allowed myself to do it. I allowed myself to let someone in. I learned that trust didn't mean blindly surrendering. It meant giving someone a chance to prove themselves, showing vulnerability, and accepting that love, like life, is imperfect. It wasn't an overnight transformation. There were moments of doubt, moments where I second-guessed myself, but each time, I reminded myself that I was strong, that I had survived, and that I had the power to choose my path. And with each passing day, I learned to trust again. As the months went on, I realized that the future I had once feared, the future without him, without the life I had planned, was not only possible, but it was filled with more hope than I ever imagined. I had rebuilt my life, not in spite of my pain, but because of it. It had shaped me into someone stronger, more resilient, more willing to embrace the beauty of life. And now, as I looked forward, I saw endless possibilities. A future that was mine to create. A future that was mine to shape. And I had never been more excited. The final chapter of this story isn't defined by him or by the past I left behind. It's defined by me. The woman who walked through fire and came out the other side, stronger and more alive than ever. I had built a life that was uniquely mine, one that I could be proud of, one where my happiness came from within. I was no longer bound by the weight of betrayal. I was free, and I was finally living the life I deserved. The future was bright, and I was ready for whatever it held.